get ready because you guys are all going to be in the photo.
We're going to do it, yeah. That was just the first photo. We're doing it again shortly. Okay, you just put that down. Yeah.
Oh, it's just nice to be able to like do some processing. I thought it was going to be hot. I know. Well, compared to like the last couple of days. Already, you guys? Yeah, and it was. And I thought it was cute, the whole sticky
Get started because I'll come in and put a sign up with your time.
Okay, baby. What is the time? It's 4:17. Okay, right. Okay. Go ahead. Show on the road. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Zoe Sinas-Sklar. I am the End Amazon Food Campaigner at Amazon Watch, and I'm so happy to be joined today by these four lovely ladies. This is Sara Shor, who's the Keep It in the Ground campaigner at 350.org. Leila Salazar-Lopez, who is the Executive Director of Amazon Watch. Osprey Orielle, who is the co-founder and Executive Director of WECAN, which is the Women's Environmental Action, I always get it wrong, Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And Briana Ruiz, who is an organizer with IdleNoMore SFA. So being here today feels particularly pertinent because the impacts of 1 degree of warming are just with us so much. And as we speak, there's Hurricane Irma, which is bearing down on Florida and has already entirely destroyed the island nations of St. Martin and Antigua and Barbuda. And we're just seeing this destruction, and this is on top of Hurricane Harvey hitting Houston. If you look in the program, you'll actually see that one of our panelists, Ryan Paras, is not here today because he is Houston-based and he's doing organizing work there and needed to be there with his community and rebuild and deal with the fact that the refineries where he lives have leaked and that there's been flaring and that his community is suffering right now. And so this is just in the US, and of course we've seen historic flooding in India and Bangladesh and Nepal, and we're seeing heat waves, and we're seeing floods, and we're seeing these huge fires all across the Northwest. And it's a heavy moment for sure. And it's a question of like how do we move forward? How do we really take meaningful action on climate change? And so why I'm so happy to be here with you all is because these four people with me are some of the people who are leading and who are supporting those who are on the front lines of climate change, the people who are most impacted, and who often, the people who are facing all these awful impacts, are the ones who are leading these fights and in solidarity with a lot of the people here. And so I'm really happy to be facilitating this conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to folks for introductions. So first, really briefly, this is Sara Shor, Keep It in the Ground campaign manager with 350.org. She is working with 350 to end all new fossil fuel developments and has done a lot of work opposing the Keystone XL pipeline, tar sands, and many other things, I'm sure. So if you want to introduce yourself and your work. So it's really good to be here on this amazing panel. These are all women that I look up to. And yeah, as Zoe said, I work with 350.org. We're a global climate organization that's working to build a movement that's big enough to address the crisis that we're seeing in the world right now. In different countries, that looks like different things. We have organizers all over the world. Some are paid, some are volunteers. Our goal is to build a movement that's big enough to really address the crisis and do it in a way that makes sense locally for folks. So I work in the US mostly, also support our Canada work on tar sands, and led our Keystone XL campaign, which is now resurging since the Trump administration has tried to bring back the Keystone XL pipeline. And now lead all of our Keep It in the Ground work in the US, which looks like trying to stop as many fossil fuel projects across this country, and really we're working to do this across the world as well. Because we know that in order to address this crisis, we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground, we need to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure, and we need to do it in a way that's just. We need to transition to a renewable economy in a way that works for people and works for communities. So excited to talk about that, and I'll pass it to Layla.
Briefly, Layla Salazar-Lopez, Executive Director of Amazon Watch since 2015. She's spent over 20 years doing organizing work to protect the rainforest, advance human rights, and has been doing this through grassroots organizing, international advocacy, and a lot more. So go ahead, Layla.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I had no idea how many people would be here since there's so many different workshops, but thank you all for being here. As Zoe mentioned, my name is Layla Salazar-Lopez, and I'm originally from Southern California and live in San Francisco, and have been with Amazon Watch for about half my life, and know many of you in the room because we've worked for many, many years on fighting Chevron, which is right here in Richmond, and is also in the Amazon, and is also in about 180 countries around the world. And that's really seeing what Texaco did in the Amazon when I was 21 years old, seeing what they had done to basically drill and dump and devastate the primary rainforest, the lands of indigenous peoples. That was my shocker moment. That kind of woke me up to say, this is completely unjust. We need to do something about this. And this is a company that, is right here in our backyard, and it is our responsibility to continue to hold them accountable for what they've done in the Amazon, to what they've done here, to what they've done all over the world. And these are companies like Chevron are the companies that are causing the crisis that we're in right now. Let's just be 100% clear about that, right? They're the ones who have caused it, they're the ones who have funded it, they're the ones who have denied it and continue to deny it, and continue to fund the denial, and continue to fund politicians who deny it. So I thought it would be just really important to start off with that. Obviously, you could tell that I'm very passionate about this because I've seen the direct impacts of these companies in the Amazon and here, right in our backyard. And that's really, I think, one of my main messages for all of us is that we connect the dots from the well to the wheel, where the oil is coming out, where the fossil fuels, where the minerals, where the extraction is coming out, to where it's going. The whole chain of custody, the whole path is a path of destruction. Extraction to refining to the end of our tailpipes. It affects all of us. And Amazon Watch, for over 20 years, we've been working to protect the Amazon and support and advance the rights of indigenous peoples. Because indigenous peoples of the Amazon are the ones who are protecting the Amazon. They're the best protectors, the best stewards, the best guardians of the Amazon. And so we stand with them as we stand with our partners and allies here in the North, and make those connections of the partners and allies, the indigenous people of both the North, the South, the East, and the West, who are all resisting fossil fuel extraction. I can go on and on.
Thank you, Layla. And this is Osprey Orielle Lake, who, as I said, is the co-founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, commonly known as WECAN, which is why I keep losing the whole piece. And she is involved with organizing nationally and internationally, bringing together grassroots and indigenous leaders and scientists and activists of other sorts, and working with policymakers to promote climate justice, resilient communities, and creating a just transition. She's also an author, and again, I'm sure so many other hats that she wears.
Thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you, and WECAN is dedicated to really working with women on the front lines of climate change in different countries around the world. And we do a lot of different kinds of programs, but for today, I really want to focus on the work that we do around divesting and investing, and really keeping fossil fuels in the ground. And one of the reasons that we're working with women is that, just to take a broader lens for a moment, I think we really need to make the connections between our patriarchal institutions and the oppression of women in the earth, and how a lot of these things are at the core of an extractive economy and a viewpoint that we can have dominion over the earth, dominion over women, dominion over people of color, and the list goes on. And I think it's really important to call these things out when we have these discussions, because we have to get at the root causes of this paradigm that we're all trying to shift out of and create a new narrative and a new way of living that really puts forward a climate justice framework. And I think that we're trying to also extract ourselves, in the positive sense, from a very dangerous neoliberal capitalistic structure that has really gotten us here, where we just have endless growth on a finite planet, and a sense that this is really where the direction of the country needs to go, and the world, in terms of our economic structures, which we know need to change. Most recently, in terms of our work directly with keeping fossil fuels in the ground, I've had the honor of working with some of the indigenous women who were either from Standing Rock or were part of the Standing Rock movement, to go on divestment delegations to Europe to directly speak to and do very strong advocacy with the financial institutions, both banks but also pension funds, different parliamentarians from different countries, to really speak to them about the great need to divest. And the angle that we've sort of been working with that's been really powerful is, as you all know, the egregious acts that happen at Standing Rock, is to really put forward the fact of this intersection of extraction of fossil fuels on indigenous lands, and truly the confrontation against indigenous rights, indigenous sovereignty, indigenous lifeways. And as Leila wonderfully said, we really also need to stand up for indigenous sisters and brothers and those on the front lines of climate change and climate injustices, but also because of the solutions they're offering, both in terms of the fact that 80% of all biodiversity left on Earth is in the hands of indigenous peoples. And so we all have a big investment in ensuring that indigenous peoples' lands and lifeways are protected, first and foremost for them, but also to really understand that this way of life and this way of caring for the water, the air, the land is so important to all of us. So we think it's a really important part of the overall divestment movement, which we know is very, very powerful. Sort of our pathway in has been to really uplift these indigenous women's voices. And we've had a very powerful time earlier this spring, where we went to Norway and Switzerland. We are certainly not the only reason, but there was a big divestment with DNB Bank, which is the main bank in Norway. And there was a $331 million investment. And part of it was because these indigenous women went to the meetings and had very powerful conversations with bank representatives, telling them what happened to them, the human rights violations that happened because of what happened with DAPL, and many other things. So I really am a firm believer in these transformative conversations that can happen if they're done in a really strong way, that we can really put power and influence and advocacy work towards the financial institutions to help us divest and get us off of fossil fuels. Thanks.
And lastly, we have Briana Ruiz, who's an organizer with IdleNoMore SF Bay, which is an indigenous-led group here in the Bay that's organizing for clean air, clean water, and soil, as well as a vibrantly healthy future. And IdleNoMore has been doing a really amazing job of bringing together people in the Native American community and other allies to take action against fossil fuels and to build for a more just future.
So hi everyone, my name is Briana. I'm Mexican in Gashgan, and I am part of IdleNoMore San Francisco Bay Area, which was founded out of the international IdleNoMore movement in 2012 that was meant to inspire people to move to action all around the world, to no longer be idle. That we understand that the time is now. Never before in history on this earth have we reached the time that the resources and the gifts of Mother Earth have been exploited and destroyed and polluted to the point that they are now, to the point where the sacred system of life on Earth, as it has existed for millennia, is being threatened, that life on Earth is now being threatened, and we understand that the time is now, we have no more time to waste. So IdleNoMore was founded to inspire people to rise up, to take care of Mother Earth, to become stewards of this land, and to recognize what it means when you put Indigenous people in power and in leadership, and to follow that leadership and wisdom of Indigenous people. Osprey mentioned that the most biodiverse places in this world are housed on Indigenous lands. And if you also look at the countries that are doing the most exploitation of Mother Earth, they're also the countries that exploit the rights of Indigenous people the most, right? So there's that connection there, and that's not an accident. And so IdleNoMore does various things here in the Bay Area, as well as connecting with solidarity of the rights of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. We hold ceremonies to pray for Mother Earth and guidance on how to move forward with that. We hold nonviolent direct actions at the powers at be that are doing the destruction, right? So civil disobedience and nonviolent direct actions, because we know that we can't continue business as usual, and that we have to have a real firm commitment to that. We do things like fight for and defend the rights of Indigenous people to practice their own religious freedoms. We had to do that a couple of months ago, just over this summer. Protect the rights of our Indigenous sisters to be able to practice their own religious ceremonies here in the city of Oakland. And so yeah, we are led by grandmothers who mentor and guide the younger ones of us. So I'm one of the younger members in IdleNoMore, and we're very privileged to be guided by our wise grandmothers who mentor us in these actions.
Thank you all. Thank you all for those introductions. So we've been throwing around the word climate justice a lot and talking about keep it in the ground. So first question to you all is, what does climate justice look like to you, and how does the keep it in the ground movement fit into that?
Yeah, sure. For me, climate justice is what the world looks like when people understand that we're not the most important life form on this planet, that we're only one of the life forms on this sacred system of Earth. And so as long as people continue to believe that we are the most important thing on this planet, there will always be exploitation of Mother Earth. There will always be exploitation of the water, the air, the soil, our non-human relatives. And so climate justice means an understanding that humans are part of a sacred system of life, where harmony and balance must be enacted, and that we as human beings are supposed to be responsible for our place in this world.
I thought that was great. I don't know if I want to add to that. I thought that was perfect.
I would just add that obviously we're in a climate crisis, and we hear a lot about we need to take climate action now. We have a climate agreement, so that's what we need to implement. Well, I would follow the leadership of the grassroots movements around the world to say we don't need climate action, we need climate justice, because the climate chaos that we're living in now affects us all, but it, as anybody who has seen or heard anything that's been happening recently, those that are most disproportionately affected by the fossil fuel extraction in the Amazon, in Richmond, in Nigeria, in Houston, are communities of color, are Indigenous people. And when we talk about 100% renewable, we want that to be a benefit for all people, not just those who can pay for it. We want it to be a just transition to a clean renewable energy economy. We want jobs, we want a safe and just transition to a 100% renewable economy. We want to make sure that if there is, we are applauding it, climate leadership in California in particular. We want to make sure it's not just, a deal that is best deal that we can get right now. We want the best deal that is a benefit for all people, especially the communities who are on the front lines of the refineries. So it's about, yes, saying we need to keep it in the ground. For me, climate justice is about keeping it in the ground. Like if we want to reduce emissions, if we want real action on climate change, then we need to keep it in the ground. And we need to not just talk about emissions reductions, but we need to talk about stopping extraction.
I think also I would add that, I think especially because the climate talks are coming up once again, COP23, 23 years that our governments have been negotiating not so well on climate change, and as we know, the United States, due to Trump, has pulled out of the climate Paris Agreement. Not that it was a great agreement, but it's really not good news that we've pulled out, just because it's not a good sign of the good faith of our country and what we should be doing with all these incredible extreme weather events. I think it's also really important to be really clear when we're talking about climate justice that we're not talking about false solutions. And when we're talking about these climate negotiations and a lot of work that's being done around, quote unquote, resolving the climate crisis, I think we need to look very strongly at the problems around geoengineering, around market mechanisms and trying to buy our way, if you will, out of this climate crisis, about different kinds of mechanisms like RED that does not really protect forests. So for me, I completely agree with everything that's been around climate justice, but it's also a sense of finding real solutions that are just, that do not harm the planet, that do not perpetuate the neoliberal capitalistic structure further and taking us down that road as if the economy we have is going to further take us to the right answer when taking us down the wrong road for so long. So I think around the climate justice framework is really being very critical and being very educated about these false solutions being offered and being very clear about what solutions are actually working. And then the last component I would say is I think also we need to understand that our democracy in this country is clearly under attack. And the fact of our right to have direct action, our right for free speech, our right for many of the things that are allowing us to demand climate justice are being threatened. And just, one blatant example is the whole issue of tiger swan that came up in Standing Rock, which I won't go into because you're all nodding your head, you understand. I think we need to realize that that's really happening and is a threat to our advocacy around climate justice. So for me, climate justice has also taken a new dimension in the Trump era, which is our right to demand climate justice and to act and to be on the streets and to do all the advocacy work we need to do to have justice.
Can I just add also that I think climate justice also speaks to how climate change intersects with all the other justice issues that we're facing in our world today. We see in Houston, people are being asked for ID when they go to shelters. So people who have warrants out or are undocumented are afraid to go get services in climate-wrecked places right now. We're seeing, as Layla said, disproportionately impacted. People who are at the forefront of the climate crisis are mostly people of color. They're people who don't have as much access to resources, and we actually have an opportunity when we strive for climate justice to not just go after the problems of releasing fossil fuels and moving to 100%, but also solving a lot of the other injustices that we see in the world today. It's about fighting for racial justice. It's about fighting for undocumented people in this country. We're seeing sort of all of these issues come together in this moment, especially as we're seeing climate disasters hit. It's sort of a confluence of all of these issues, and as we work towards climate justice, we have the opportunity to actually be solving all of these problems at the same time. So that would be an added definition of what we're working towards.
Great, thank you all. Many of you began to touch on this, but I was wondering if you all could speak a little more specifically to the challenges as well as the opportunities of this particular moment in time under a Trump presidency and with, as Sara said so well, the confluence of so many problems in the world.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the rollback of basically all of
much of what many movements have fought for many decades during this administration, and it's scary. It's honestly very scary, and as we see, I think Zoe introduced this panel very well. We're in a moment where we're seeing climate destruction hit in a very visceral way. Even here in the Bay Area, the heat waves that we saw just last week, we're seeing fires all across the West Coast, we're seeing the flooding from all of these hurricanes, and it's not just here in the US, these climate impacts are hitting us across the world. I think, like I just said, in the Trump era and always, everything is connected. All of these things that we're working towards are connected. And I think in the Trump era, that's very obvious. It's more obvious than it's been in the past, I think. And I would also say that in the Trump era, I think there's a lot of grassroots energy out there. I mean, raise your hand in here if you have gone to a protest or been out in the streets in the last month. Basically everybody. There's a lot of opportunities for getting out there in the streets, and I would say that, I know that I have a lot of friends who have not been out in the streets before the Trump era, and now they're coming out. And so I think there's a major opportunity to build in this moment because it's also obvious now. I think all of these injustices existed before Trump, but now they're much more visible. And so I think we have an opportunity to organize a lot more people and have a lot more people out in the streets fighting for the solutions that we know we need, and being led by the folks who are the most impacted by all of these problems. And I also think we have a really amazing opportunity at the local and state level to actually pass legislation and get local officials who are saying that they're anti-Trump, which are a lot of our local officials here in California, to actually put forth the real or adopt the real solutions that impacted communities have been putting forward for many, many decades. So I think we have a major opportunity at the local level, and especially in a place like California, to really do that.
I agree, everything she said. I just wanted to comment, say, taking it to the international level, because the reality for an organization, a small organization, I would say, like Amazon Watch, that we have a very big mission of protecting the Amazon, defending indigenous people's rights, and defending our climate. And as soon as number 45, I hate saying his name, came into office, we did see an effect on our work, where here domestically, a lot of our supporters, a lot of our allies started kind of inwardly focusing and saying, we need to focus on our issues. Like, we need to, I love the Amazon, I love your work, but I need to focus on Planned Parenthood and ACLU, and thanks, I love what you're doing, and I'm like, wait a minute, actually, that's, yes, we need to do that, but we also need to realize that it's like we're under attack. We're not just under attack here in the U.S. Like we're under a political, economic, social, ecological, and spiritual crisis, I would say. This is not just a domestic crisis. This is an international crisis. And it's what's happening in our country is also happening in Brazil. It's also happening in many countries in Latin America. It was almost happened in France. So it's not just happening here. It's happening all around the world, and people are rising up and responding and taking action. So a year ago, I remember talking to people, and I felt like I had to be careful about saying resist, because it was like, no, we want to just talk about solutions, and we have to be positive. And yes, thank you, Creator, for working that. We work with Indigenous people, and we do keep positive, and we do talk about solutions, and we do go back to where our ancestors have led us to remind us where we have to be and be positive and be spiritual and remember where we're coming from. But we do have to talk about resistance. I think you all, I don't have to preach to you all about that. That's why we're here. Like, we do have to talk about resistance, resilience, defending. We do have to talk about renew, and that's like the banner of, the Indigenous Rising Banner at the People's Climate March. It was like, Indigenous rights equals climate justice. Defend, protect, renew, resist. And that is, whenever I start getting down, I'm like, just remember that. Just remember that. This is what we're supposed to do. This is what we are here for. And, I also just think about our partners in the Amazon and here, who just, when we do get kind of overwhelmed with everything that's happening, we do get together and we pray. And we do get together and say, we're here, as women, we come together. As Indigenous people, as allies, we come together and we work together. And, and then I remember, I start going back to, what our partners have done and what they've gone through. Think about the Ua people of Colombia. But 20 years ago, this year we're celebrating the 20 years of the Ua people coming to the north to say, keep the blood of Mother Earth in the ground. 20 years ago, they said keep it in the ground. They didn't say keep it in the ground. They said keep the blood of Mother Earth in the ground. They brought that message to us. They have done that. They told us that they appreciate all of the support, but it was their praying that moved the oil so that the companies couldn't get it. And so that's what I remember. They did this when their entire territory was militarized, when they were surrounded by paramilitaries and the FARC, and they were being pressured by the government to drill for oil in their land. So if they could do that, we could do it too.
Yeah, I think that, I think that this is really a time for a lot of reflection also for all of us. We have so many in the WECAN network, we work with, a lot of women on the front lines of these battles, not just in the United States, but, also in partnership with Amazon Watch, with a lot of the women in the Amazon, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the MENA region. And I would also just like to say, I think it's not only time for deep reflection, but also learning how to maintain ourselves and have endurance and not burn out, for lack of a better term, because this is really an assault. I mean, we're all raising our hands because of the fact of the different marches we've been a part of. There's one like every weekend, or every week, and we all know what it's like to look at the news every day and just be stunned at the next level of how low things can go towards our democracy, towards our communities, towards frontline people, towards the earth, towards nature, our waters, our land, our way of life. And it's not just here in the United States, it's all over the world in different ways. And I do think it's so important that we figure out how more and more to support each other and also not have personal fatigue. Because this is a long haul. I mean, we've been building to this moment for a long time. This has been coming for a long time. We've been having resistance movements in different ways. We've been fighting in different ways. And now we're sort of at that the final act, if you will, of this particular drama of humanity playing out. And it's a life and death struggle. It truly is. And I think not calling it that is a mistake. I think it's important that we can talk really honestly about how serious this moment is. And already is for so many people who have already lost their lives, or right now are, what their future is in Houston. I mean, how do you rebuild then? If you're, someone who's already in poverty and not supported in your community, a person of color, it's really, beyond devastating. So, our partners and allies in different countries where we know Global Witness has reported to us that more and more land defenders are being murdered because they're standing up for their rivers or standing up against mining companies. So we know that that's increasing. So I think there's no shortage of seeing that we are being assaulted at so many levels, and how do we care for ourselves and our well-being? Because no matter how we look at it, in my perspective, here we are in the United States, relatively speaking, in the middle of this assault, we're still really privileged. We're incredibly privileged still yet. So I think it's a matter of, you know, how do we create our own personal resilience, create community, can we have prayer, how we are in ceremony, how we might have our own spiritual practices, whatever that is that keeps us really grounded with Mother Earth, grounded in being able to renew is so critical right now because so much is going on. And simultaneously understanding also our privilege at the same time, because it really creates that measure of how much we actually still have. You know, I know from so many of our colleagues that are not in this country, you know, when disaster hits, what's that mean? Just, you know, if you want to, you know, come an aspirin if you're not feeling well, and not being able to have that. So I think that we need to simultaneously, you know, understand our need for renewal, understanding our privilege, and keep stepping back to see the bigger picture, because we're going to have to be here for the long haul. This is not going to go away fast, but we're going to have really good strategy with the partners we work with, whatever organizations you're with, whatever you're doing, to continue to remember that we've got to get out on the street, but we also have to step back and get deep in our narrative, deep in our strategy, and have that time to reflect, because we have to be so thoughtful about where we put our time and energy and make sure that we're having an analysis that can really get us to where we're going. So I would just, you know, have, you know, encouragement about reflection, deep analysis, continued education, so that we have, you know, sort of the long game in mind, because we're going to really need that.
Yeah, thank you for everything that you all have mentioned, and I agree with all of you. And it can be really deafening to talk about all of the challenges and how difficult times are during this Trump era. And we can focus on that. And also there's a lot of people that have never felt the challenges of what it feels like to have your rights threatened or the rights of your loved ones threatened until now, right? And that's a great privilege. I personally haven't experienced anything during this Trump era that I haven't at some point in my life already experienced. In the way that I live in this world, in the way that I see this world, and that all of my loved ones see this world. You know, there are so many people in this world that have been attacked for such a long time. Really nothing is different under the Trump era, except that it's just more obvious now, right? And so the act of survival is a revolutionary act in and of itself. And so it's a challenge, but it's also a big opportunity that we have right now to protect one another in the organizing that we're doing. And I want to add an opportunity, because I think a lot of us really talked about the negative things that are happening right now. But a really big opportunity that we have is the connection of all of our struggles, right? There's so many people waking up right now that have never been woken up before, right? And that's a really big gift that we have to be able to use. One of the things that we've done in IdleNoMore here in the Bay Area is that we led a series of refinery quarter healing walks, where we understood that the Bay Area is one of the largest clusters of refineries in the entire nation, right? And so we led a series of 4 walks for a total of 4 years. And we understand that the oil that comes to these refineries here that's processed here in the Bay Area comes from places like the Amazon, right? And so we know the way that all of our issues are connected. And we also have this opportunity now to really dissect and break apart what our understanding of what an activist is, right? When you all think of an activist, most people think of the people in this room, right? And what do the people in this room look like? But really an activist can be all of the people in our lives, all of our loved ones. Who are all of the people that we're leaving out when we think of the word activist, right? Are we leaving out young people, poor people, people of color, or whoever it is that we're leaving out? And so that's a really big opportunity right now, is that activism and defending the water, defending Mother Earth, coming together against oppression and anti-racism, it's being popularized right now. And so that's a really, really big opportunity for us.
Sort of jumping off of what Briana was saying there, what is a moment in the last few months that has given you hope, or what is like a general trend that in this moment is giving you hope as you move through this work?
The refinery healing walks.
Yeah.
How many people have been a part of the refinery healing walks over the last 4 years? I mean, I just, you know, I remember Penny, one of our teachers, grandmothers, elders saying, you know, this is not a march, this is not a protest. This is a walk in prayer, a walk in prayer for the water. And that, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference when those of us who are activists, who are mothers, have a chance to walk silently, not be chanting, not be carrying children. I'll speak for myself. You know, that time is really healing, and it brings a lot of us together. So I know that the healing walks are officially over, but I'm sure there'll be, you know, there's going to be a continuance of that power. And I mean, it happens, you know, every new moon through the prayer ceremonies, and it happens every solstice and equinox, right? Solstice and equinox. The actions happen every solstice and equinox. So, you know, that's going to continue. It's not going to end. But I think that and then when Gloria Ushigwa came, was one of our sisters from the Amazon, from the Zapata people, she came in for the final healing walk, and just so much momentum was gathered around Gloria being here. You know, this Zapata indigenous woman coming from the Amazon to participate, you know, whose land, whose entire territory had been concessioned to Chinese oil companies to pay off Ecuadorian debt. You know, and that oil, if drilled, will come to Richmond, will come to El Segundo, will come to California. So like the power of that connection and just how much momentum was built, you know, like before we tried to make letter deliveries and to China and they never accepted it, and this time they did. I mean, that, you know, that was an actual concrete thing that we did that happened, and then it also spiritually and for emotionally, for Gloria, it made a huge difference. For her to be able to go back and say, we did something very concrete, and now the government wants to meet with me, and now everybody wants to meet with me, like, that's inspiring.
So it looks like we're about to wrap up, so before we do, I would love for you all to share a piece of hope if you want to add that on, as well as a way in which which people in the room can get involved with the wonderful work you all are leading.
So something that gives me hope is memory, and spirituality being a part of our movement. So if you look at every successful movement throughout history, you look at the civil rights movement, the movement with Gandhi, spirituality has always been a part of that. And so when we begin our actions and our refinery quarter healing walks with prayers for the water, that memory is what gives me hope. The memory that I can remember through my ancestors, a time when the water was free, when the oil was able to run free as well. And to know that that time can come again, that there are dams that are being freed right now. It's happening, right? That there are indigenous tribes that are being restored with their traditional relationships with their non-human relatives, like the salmon, for the Winnemem Wintu tribes. And so that's what gives me hope, is that memory and knowing what can be, right? And I think the best way for people to get involved, to keep it in the ground and against fossil fuels, is to find what your passion is, right? What is your gift? What is your commitment? What is your sweet spot? And hone in on that, right? Because this world needs people to come alive, people to find their light, and people to find their gift and spread that and share that with other human beings. So we can all have a role, and we all need to have a role in keeping it in the ground. But all of our role is going to look a little bit differently, because it's like a puzzle, and we need every single puzzle piece for that puzzle to be complete.
Well, one of the
things that brings me terrific hope is our youth. And the voice of our youth. We work with different young people, and I really am loving the spirit of the young people, the vision of our young people, and as many of you know, the whole Standing Rock movement came out of young people running to Washington, D.C. to say we want to protect our water. And all over the world, we're seeing just this incredible wisdom and power and strength out of our young people. And one of the things also that's been very moving for me in this divestment work of meeting with, these different banks and financial institutions in Europe, it takes a lot of courage for these Indigenous women to go into these spaces because it triggers them. They have to talk about what traumatized them. They have to talk about what's happening. They have to talk about what's happening on their land. And these are the institutions and the people that are funding, basically genocide on their land and destruction of their territories and have their very lives in their hand. And I've been so moved that every time we go into these meetings, we do have a time of prayer and to go in peace and not go in hatred and not go in seeing the enemy, and really understanding this has to be a very refined conversation so that we can actually communicate. And that has been really powerful and really moving. And it doesn't mean that we haven't had very strong, difficult conversations and loud conversations, but it has been done with not animosity and not like us and them, and really seeing how we need to really convey very serious messages, but in a way that has dignity and grace, where it really allows other people to change where they're coming from. And I think we need to be able to have spaces for that. And I've been deeply moved by a lot of the Indigenous women and their incredible strength in these situations that are not easy to navigate. And that's been a very powerful thing and something I think we can all really practice and learn from.
Thank you for bringing women together all over the world. Yeah, basically what you all said, but youth, women, Indigenous people, my children, our future generations, that's what gives me hope. And the unity that is being created right now, that's what gives me hope. There's many events coming up. We're actually in the midst of planning a 3-week delegation with Aura Tegria, who's the first ever Indigenous woman lawyer from the Uwa Nation of Colombia. And she's going to be coming to the Bay Area. And we're doing an event with IdleNoMore, SF Bay Area, and many other organizations at the Intertribal Friendship House on September 26th. And we'll be doing a whole other series of events, but that's something coming up really soon that you all can come and meet Aura and learn more about our work. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but you could also get involved with the End Amazon Crude campaign at Amazon Watch, which is basically our campaign to stop using crude from the Amazon. That's directly coming here. So
You can talk to me about that.
I don't have much to add. I think you all covered it. I would just say what inspires me is when ordinary people, like all of us in the room, are standing up and asking and demanding the things that we know that we need, even if they sound crazy. And so I'm inspired by seeing that every day, and I also am just inspired by the women on this panel and the women leadership that are able to really show that ambition and also show the love and unity and prayer and that type of leadership as well, because I think that's going to be integral for us to sustain the beautiful movements that are growing and that we want to have last forever.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all.
If anybody wants to take a picture.
Have a panel full of women. Yeah, thank you.
Does anybody want to take a picture with the banner?
Yeah, let's take a
Real quick?
We're great.
Thank you guys.